The Montana wind howled like a ghost through the snow-drenched forest as Michael Thompson tightened his grip on his 12-year-old daughter Luna's hand. They pushed forward through the drifts, desperate to make it home, before the blizzard swallowed the world around them. Ahead, their 3 shepherd dogs carved a path through the whiteness-focused alert. Suddenly, the lead dog froze. Its ears shot up. Without a sound, it sprinted toward a fallen tree, the other 2 following fast behind. "Dad, look," Luna cried, pointing. There nestled in the snow was something small, broken, barely breathing. Michael knelt beside it and felt his heart twist. A bobcat kitten. Tiny limp, its fur matted with blood. Its sides rose and fell in shallow, painful breaths. Beside it, buried under a drift, the cruel glint of a steel poacher's trap. Its mother was likely gone, and the cold was closing in. But the most astonishing sight wasn't the kitten, it was the dogs. No growling, no instinct to attack. Instead, the lead shepherd leaned down and gently licked the kitten's head as if to say, "You're safe now." At home, Rebecca, Michael's wife, and a veterinarian was horrified at first. "It's a wild animal," she warned. "It won't make it through the night." But she treated it anyway. And in that moment, what should have been the end of a wild creature's story quietly became its beginning. Against all odds, the little bobcat survived that first freezing night. Curled in a blanket-lined box on the kitchen floor, surrounded by 3 shepherd dogs who refused to leave its side, the kitten stirred at dawn, its body weak but alive. Rebecca, who had doubted it would last till morning, was stunned. Luna beamed. Michael, always the observer, quietly noted, that shouldn't have happened. They named the kitten Scout because, as Luna explained, he's going to have to learn everything from scratch, how to survive, how to belong. What they didn't know yet was just how right she was. In the days that followed, Scout did more than heal. He adapted, but not in the way anyone expected. Most wild animals, when rescued, keep their distance. They hiss, claw, or hide. But Scout followed. At first it was subtle. He watched the dogs, studied them. When the lead shepherd, Atlas, sat at the window, ears perked, scanning the yard, Scout crept up beside him, mimicked the posture, and stared in the same direction. When the youngest dog, Milo, playfully pounced at a rope toy, Scout leapt after him, tumbling clumsily, eyes wide with fascination. He wasn't acting like a bobcat. He was learning to be a dog. Rebecca noticed it first. "He doesn't just live among them," she whispered to Michael one night. "He's imprinting." Michael, a trained wildlife biologist, had seen animal bonding before, but nothing like this. "It's not just socialization," he muttered, flipping open a fresh notebook. "This is cross-species behavioral mimicry. It's rare, almost unheard of." He began to document everything: Scout's movements, his interactions, his play patterns, his vocalizations, and the strangest thing, he didn't meow. He made a noise somewhere between a low hiss and a growl, but sometimes, just sometimes, it sounded eerily close to a bark. Within a month, Scout was no longer just a guest in the house, he was part of the pack. He woke when the dogs woke, ate when they ate, joined their daily walks across the snowy acreage of the Thompson farm, padding alongside them like he'd been born with paw prints beside theirs. When Atlas patrolled the property's perimeter, Scout followed at his side, stopping when he stopped, moving when he moved. At night, Scout curled up in the middle of the 3 dogs, his spotted coat blending into their thick fur as if he'd always been there. Luna captured it all on video, Scout chasing Milo through the field. Scout standing guard beside Atlas Scout, clumsily trying to bark at a passing deer. She began sharing clips online, and almost overnight, Scout became a phenomenon. People didn't know what to call him. Was he a bobcat? A pet? A miracle? Some called it cute. Michael knew it was much more than that. "This is behavior convergence," he told a local reporter. "Instinct shaped by environment and emotional connection. It's an incredibly rare case of a wild animal adapting socially, not just for survival, but for belonging." But no science could fully explain what happened the night a neighbor's ATV got too close to the house. Atlas barked sharply. Milo growled. Scout sprang to his feet, fur-bristled ears flat, but instead of fleeing like a wild cat, he stepped in front of Luna tail lashing. He wasn't trying to escape. He was protecting. That night, Michael wrote a single sentence in his notebook. He thinks he's one of them. By the end of the 4th month, Scout was unrecognizable from the weak creature they had found under the snow. He was strong, agile, and confident. His eyes, once cloudy with pain, now gleamed with fierce intelligence. His instincts were still there. He could climb a tree in seconds, stalk a squirrel with silent precision, but layered over those instincts were learned behaviors that shouldn't have belonged to him. He would come when called. He patrolled. He greeted guests at the door, tail up, body relaxed like a dog. He wasn't domesticated. He was something new. And yet, even as the family embraced this strange, beautiful reality, Michael knew it couldn't last forever. Scout wasn't theirs, not truly. He was a wild animal, and the law was clear. No permits, no exceptions. But as he watched Luna lying in the snow, Scout curled beside her like a sibling, Michael also knew something else. This wasn't just a story of science anymore. It was a story of bonding, of instinct turned to trust, of a creature born wild but raised in love. And whatever came next, whether the world would understand or not, Scout had already chosen his pack. Scout wasn't supposed to be famous, but fame, like instinct, can be unpredictable. It started innocently. Luna posted a short clip of Scout playing tug-of-war with Milo. It was funny, heart-melting, and deeply strange. A wild bobcat pulling at a rope toy with a shepherd dog tail twitching like any backyard pup. Then came the next video, Scout following Atlas on patrol, tail up steps in sync. Then another Scout sitting at the door, ears perked, waiting patiently with the other dogs for dinner. By the end of the week, Luna's video had over 4 million views. Comments flooded in. This can't be real. That bobcat thinks he's a German shepherd. Nature's weirdest adoption story, and I love it. News outlets picked it up. Headlines called, "Scout the Bobcat That Forgot He's Wild." Talk shows wanted interviews. Zoologists reached out. The Thompson farm suddenly became a point on the map. And that's when the authorities came knocking. One crisp morning, Ranger Martinez arrived. He had seen the videos. So had his supervisors. "Beautiful animal," he said, watching Scout chase after a stick thrown by Luna. "Smart, too." He paused. "But you know this isn't legal, right?" Michael nodded. "We know." Martinez's voice softened. "You're not in trouble, not yet. But you can't keep a wild bobcat without a state permit, especially not one this public." Michael sighed. "We're applying." Martinez nodded once. "Do it fast." The Thompsons filed for a special wildlife permit, rare but not unheard of. They submitted documentation of Scout's rescue, veterinary records, behavioral logs, videos, and even letters of support from local vets and teachers. Luna handwrote a heartfelt note. "Scout is my family. Please don't take him away." Weeks passed. Scout, unaware of the looming threat, thrived. He grew stronger, faster, and oddly more dog every day. He still climbed trees and stalked squirrels, but came when called, shared food, and guarded the farm with Atlas as if he'd been born into the role. Then the letter came. Application denied. No exceptions. No appeals. Scout had to be returned to the wild. The dinner table that night was silent. Rebecca read the letter aloud, voice tight. Michael set it down. They didn't even consider the videos, the data. Nothing. Luna sat, frozen, tears welling. "We can't just let them take him." Rebecca shook her head. "It's the law, sweetheart. They say it's for his own good." Luna stood suddenly. "Then we'll show them it's not." She posted again. This time not a cute video, a plea. In it, Luna stood on their snow-covered porch, Scout by her side, flanked by Milo and Atlas. "My name is Luna Thompson," she said, voice trembling but strong. "This is Scout. He was dying when we found him. Now he's our family. They want to take him away, send him to a place he doesn't know. But Scout isn't just wild anymore. He's not a pet either. He's something in between. He's home here. The video went viral within 24 hours. 12 million views. Hashtags trended. Save Scout. Let him stay. More than wild. Thousands of people signed petitions. Parents sent in drawings from children who loved Scout. Veterans, teachers, scientists all wrote letters. Some cried. Others sent donations asking how they could help. Public pressure rose. And finally, the Wildlife Conservation Department agreed they would send a team to evaluate Scout's case before any final decision was made. On the day the team arrived, the air on the farm felt different, tense, expectant. The director herself came accompanied by a senior zoologist and Ranger Martinez. They observed Scout quietly, no fanfare, no interaction, just watching. They saw Scout respond to his name, follow Atlas, sit on command. They watched him patrol the fence line, nuzzle Milo's neck, and curl up beside the dogs when they lay down in the snow. They watched Luna brush snow off Scout's back, and Scout lean gently into her hand. "This is remarkable," the zoologist whispered. The director said nothing for a long time. Then finally, "Scout is not a pet, but he's not a typical wild bobcat anymore either. We're looking at something that defies classification." But her next words cut through the air like a blade. "The law doesn't allow exceptions. The bobcat is still a wild animal. He must be reintroduced to his natural habitat." Silence. No one argued. There were no more cards left to play. Only time. And heartbreak. The morning of Scout's departure arrived wrapped in silence. The sky was a flat gray, the kind that muted sound and color. Snow fell steadily soft but relentless, blanketing the Thompson farm in a stillness that felt like a warning. Michael loaded the truck with quiet hands. Rebecca packed a weatherproof bag of high-protein food enough for 2 weeks. Luna, in her winter coat, stood motionless beside Scout's transport crate, one hand resting on its cold metal frame. Inside, Scout shifted uneasily. He didn't growl, he didn't hiss. He only watched eyes flicking from Luna to the dogs to the trees in the distance and back again. He knew something was different. The dogs knew too. Atlas, the lead shepherd, paced in circles, ears flat against his head. Milo whined and pressed his snout against the crate's bars. Even Jasper, the usually calm middle dog, let out low, uneasy rumbles. Then came the moment no one was ready for. Michael bent down and opened the crate door. Immediately, all 3 dogs lunged, not to attack, but to block. Atlas placed his massive body between the crate and the tailgate. Milo barked with desperation, spinning in place. Jasper stood still, his eyes locked on Michael's as if pleading, "Don't do this." "Move," Michael said softly. But his voice cracked. Only after he knelt and placed both hands on Atlas's chest, whispering, "He needs to go." "We don't have a choice," did the dog finally step aside. Luna couldn't hold it in anymore. She collapsed to her knees in the snow, sobbing into her gloves. Scout turned toward the sound and let out a strange noise, part growl, part whimper. He pressed his face to the bars, as if trying to reach her. They drove in silence. The release site was a protected valley, nearly 100 miles from the farm, dense with trees, flowing water, and far from any human settlement. It was everything a wild bobcat could want. Everything Scout had never known. At the edge of a mossy clearing, the rangers opened the crate. Scout hesitated. He stepped out cautiously, nose-twitching eyes scanning the unfamiliar wilderness. For a moment he turned back, looked at Michael, at Luna, at the empty crate, and didn't move. Then a rustle in the underbrush broke the stillness. Instinct kicked in. And Scout was gone, vanishing into the trees like smoke, fast and fluid, leaving nothing behind but paw prints and silence. The drive home felt longer than the drive out. Luna sat between her parents' hands clenched tightly around the GPS tracker on her phone. A blinking green dot moved slowly across a digital map. He's okay, Michael said, trying to believe it. He's adapting. But that night back at the farm, the dogs refused to go inside. They sat on the porch, in the snow eyes fixed on the horizon where the forest met the sky, waiting. The first few days brought cautious hope. The GPS showed Scout moving through the wilderness, stopping at water sources, avoiding human paths. He seemed to be learning surviving. But then on the 12th night, the signal vanished. The last ping came from a rocky hillside just 40 miles from the farm. Luna dropped her phone. Michael immediately began packing. They searched for hours, calling Scout's name through the wind. They found nothing but a torn piece of the GPS collar dangling from a low branch, frayed broken. He got caught, Michael said grimly, snagged on something, maybe panicked and tore it off. But is he hurt? Luna asked, voice shaking. Michael didn't answer. They returned home empty-handed. The following days were agony. Luna stopped eating. The dogs howled at night. Rebecca contacted every ranger station and animal hospital within 100 miles. No reports. No sightings. Michael studied topographic maps late into the night, tracing possible routes. If he's still moving in a straight line, if he's trying to come back, but why would he? Rebecca whispered. He's wild. That's what they said. Michael looked up. He may be wild, but he remembers who loved him. On the 16th night, during a quiet dinner that none of them touched, something stirred. The dogs leapt up all at once. Atlas barked sharp and urgent. Jasper and Milo raced to the door, tails high, bodies alert. Michael opened it, and there, at the edge of the yard, stood Scout. Muddy, thinner, scratched. The GPS collar gone, but alive, and staring straight at them. Luna screamed and ran. Scout didn't wait. He bounded forward, not like a wild animal returning to a familiar place, but like a dog coming home. The dogs met him halfway, tails, wagging bodies crashing into each other in a tangle of fur and joyful noise. Scout nuzzled them all in turn, then pressed his face into Luna's chest as she fell to her knees, sobbing into his neck. Rebecca covered her mouth. Michael looked to the hills. He had no idea how Scout had survived, but he knew exactly why he came back. Because love is instinct too. The broken GPS collar lay on the kitchen table, its frayed strap, a haunting reminder of what they'd lost. Michael stared at it for hours, retracing Scout's route on paper maps and satellite data. The numbers didn't lie. Scout had traveled over 100 miles through some of the most unforgiving terrain in Montana, rivers, ravines, predator territory, even a major highway. But the most extraordinary detail, he hadn't wandered. He had chosen. The GPS trail before it was lost revealed a near-linear path. Scout wasn't just surviving, he was coming home. In the days before the signal vanished, Michael tracked every movement. On day 4th, Scout had approached a swollen river. A wild bobcat would have avoided it. But Scout, raised beside dogs unafraid of water, had studied them crossing creeks all winter. He found a narrow point and swam. On day 7th, Scout reached a highway. The GPS showed he waited for nearly 3 hours hidden in the brush before sprinting across in a rare moment of open road. Every obstacle he encountered, he solved. Every path he chose, he calculated. Michael whispered to Rebecca one night, pointing to the glowing dots on the screen. "This isn't chance. He's trying to find us." But then, on day 12, the screen went dark. No signal, no ping, just silence. They searched the last known location, nothing but trees, rocks, and a scrap of plastic caught on a branch. Luna stopped eating. The dogs refused to play. Even the house seemed to hold its breath, as if afraid any sound would shatter the fragile hope they clung to. Each night, Michael reviewed the last coordinates again, retracing distances, estimating time. If he wasn't hurt, if he kept moving, he could reach the farm in 4 more days, he said softly. Rebecca only nodded. Her eyes were tired. Hope was a heavy thing to carry. Then came the 16th night. Snow had fallen again, covering old tracks, softening the world. The family sat around the dinner table, untouched plates in front of them. And then the dogs they knew. Atlas leapt up first, barking sharply, ears pointed toward the door. Milo and Jasper followed, whimpering tails thrashing wildly. Michael moved fast, heart hammering. He threw open the door. Moonlight spilled onto the snow. And there he was, Scout, thinner, dirtier without his collar, but unmistakably alive, and standing at the edge of the yard as if nothing and everything had changed. Luna screamed and ran her boots crunching in the snow. Scout didn't hesitate. He bounded forward not with the stealth of a wild predator, but with the eager sprint of a loyal companion returning home. The three dogs met him in a blur of fur and sound. They barked, cried, and tumbled over each other in a reunion so raw it could only be called family. Luna dropped to her knees, sobbing as Scout buried his face into her coat. Rebecca and Michael stood back, eyes glassy, unable to speak. Because the impossible had happened. Scout had come home, not by scent, not by accident, not by instinct, but by memory, by love, by choice. Later that night, Rebecca examined him. A few scrapes, some weight loss. A shallow wound where the collar had likely gotten snagged, but otherwise remarkably healthy. "He's a survivor," she whispered. And something more. Michael sat quietly nearby, flipping through his field notes. No wild bobcat has ever done this. Not like this. Not with this kind of precision or purpose. Rebecca nodded. Because he's not just wild. The next morning, Michael called Ranger Martinez. The ranger arrived by noon, jaw tight with disbelief, as he saw Scout curled up in the sun, flanked by the three dogs like nothing had ever happened. "This doesn't happen," he muttered. "They don't come back. They don't track their way across 100 miles of wilderness to the exact yard where they were raised." Michael said nothing. Neither did Scout. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. That night, as Luna sat on the porch with Scout resting at her feet, she whispered into the wind, "You didn't come back because you're a pet. You came back because you remember who loves you." And deep down, even the stars seemed to agree. By sunrise the next day, word had already spread. Scout was back. Neighbors stopped by the Thompson farm, stunned. Photos circulated online of the bobcat curled up beside the three dogs on the porch like a prodigal brother returning from war. The local paper ran a headline, "The Wild Cat Who Came Home." But not everyone saw it as a miracle. The Wildlife Conservation Department was not celebrating. Less than 48 hours after Scout's return, Ranger Martinez arrived again, this time accompanied by two officials in government-issued parkas and expressions carved from stone. They didn't come to talk. They came to observe. Scout didn't flinch at the presence of strangers. He stayed close to Atlas, mirroring the older dog's body language. When Rebecca approached with a bowl of food, Scout sat and waited for her nod before eating just like the dogs. When Milo barked at a passing truck, Scout stood beside him, tail-stiff eyes scanning the horizon. The officials watched in silence. At one point, one leaned over to Martinez and whispered, "That can't be real." But it was. Everything they knew about wild animal behavior said this wasn't possible. Scout should have been territorial, aloof, possibly dangerous. Instead, he was alert, responsive, engaged, and somehow gentle. Later, when the visitors entered the house, Scout waited by the door. When they exited, he rejoined the dogs without hesitation. One of the officials finally asked, "Does he ever try to hunt them?" "Play rough." Michael shook his head. "He protects them." The silence that followed felt like a shift. A week later, the director of the Wildlife Conservation Department herself arrived at the farm. She didn't speak much. She simply watched. She observed Scout patrolling the fence line with Atlas running back to check on Luna in the field, chasing after a toy tossed by Milo, and curling into a sunlit patch of grass beside the pack tail, flicking eyes half closed in complete comfort. At the end of the day, she stood with Rebecca and Michael on the porch. This, she said slowly, challenges everything we understand about species behavior. Michael didn't speak. He knew better than to push. We've reviewed all the documentation, she continued. Videos, GPS tracking, veterinary reports. It's unprecedented. She paused, then said the words they never thought they'd hear. We're prepared to make an exception. Rebecca blinked. You mean we're offering a conditional permit, the director said. A special case designation. Scout will remain under your care as part of a pilot program in interspecies behavioral study. Michael exhaled, shoulders dropping for the first time in weeks. Luna, who had been standing quietly behind the screen door, let out a loud gasp and burst into tears. The director smiled faintly. We've never done this before. But this isn't just a bobcat anymore. It's something else, something between. The conditions were clear. Scout would stay on the Thompson farm, but under specific terms, a large, secure outdoor enclosure would be built for overnight housing and observation. The family would allow monthly check-ins from wildlife officers and researchers. Scout's interactions with the dog's humans and environment would be logged. The Thompsons would participate in a public education initiative about wildlife behavior, coexistence, and ethical boundaries. Michael and Rebecca agreed on the spot. For them, this wasn't just about Scout staying, it was about sharing a story that could change how people see the wild. In the weeks that followed, the enclosure was built spacious, open, full of trees and rocks and shaded spots. But Scout rarely stayed inside. Most nights he lay curled beside the dogs outside the gate, his tail touching Milo's back, his ears twitching in sync with Atlas. Visitors began to trickle in, students, scientists, even skeptics, all drawn by the impossible truth. A wild bobcat raised by dogs had chosen to stay not for safety, but for connection. And when they watched Scout how he moved, responded, protected, they didn't see a pet. They didn't see a wild animal. They saw something else. A living bridge. Michael published a paper on Scout's behavior. It was accepted into a major journal and sparked international attention. Conferences invited him to speak. Other researchers came to observe. But to Michael, the most important research wasn't in the numbers. It was in the way Scout watched the hills always with one ear turned toward the house. It was in the way he greeted Luna with a soft chirp each morning. It was in the way he sat regal and alert beside the dogs as they surveyed their home. And sometimes Michael thought, maybe we don't need to explain everything. Because what they had here wasn't just an anomaly. It was proof that nature isn't always predictable, that love can rewrite instinct. That family isn't about species or biology. It's about belonging. Scout grew into a magnificent adult bobcat, sleek, powerful with golden eyes that carried the wild and a soul that knew love. He lived in his custom-built outdoor habitat, but spent most of his time just outside it, curled beside the 3 shepherd dogs who had once raised him as their own. Every morning he greeted Luna with a soft chirp. Every evening he joined Atlas on his quiet patrol along the fence line, as if guarding not just land, but family. The Thompson farm became more than a home, it became a place of learning. Students, researchers, and families came to see the bobcat who thought he was a dog. To many, Scout was a curiosity, but to those who watched closely, he was something deeper, a living story of instinct reshaped by love. Michael published a scientific paper on Scout's case. It sparked conversation across the country. Luna, now 14, decided she would become a zoologist. And Scout. He remained what he had always been, not fully wild, not fully tame, just wholly himself. For the Thompsons, Scout was more than an animal. He was proof that family is not defined by species, blood, or biology, but by love, protection, and belonging. Because sometimes, home isn't where you were born, it's where someone waits for you to come back.